If we're using sex to regulate our emotions, we're not necessarily using it to show and receive love. And that's what I think most of us are really craving, to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved in this most vulnerable way. But when we're using it as an emotional regulation tool, it sort of sabotages that greater desire and need that most of us have.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Did you know that most outcome studies of couples that visit traditional sex therapy have very poor outcomes? What they do is 2 years after a couple goes to sex therapy, they ask them, has their sexual relationship improved compared to how they were before therapy? And most people report no improvement. They're still just as dissatisfied 2 years later as they were before therapy. Now, this insight is particularly striking to me as a self-taught sex therapist and intimacy coach dedicated to transforming couples' intimate lives. And as I dig deeper, I think it's because conventional sex therapy, that model, was developed in the 1960s and 70s by Masters and Johnson, and it has a primary focus on the individual, genitals, and sexual dysfunction. There isn't a lot of focus on sex in the context of a marriage relationship. Now, if a couple struggles, let's say, mismatched libidos, which is the number one complaint that most people go to therapy for, one person wants sex more than the other person. Now, if you follow the Masters and Johnson style of sex therapy, it primarily will focus on the person with the lower sexual desire. And that person gets a lot of the attention in the therapy, and they try to get that person to want sex more. And that might be helpful, but what if the problem isn't entirely the lower desire spouse's fault? What if the higher desire spouse plays a big part in the dissatisfaction of the marriage? I believe that both partners co-create their dynamic in the marriage, and thus both people contribute to the challenges that they face in their relationship. In my experience, sexual struggles are actually symptomatic of deeper issues within the relationship. That's why I believe traditional sex therapy isn't that helpful at addressing desire differences, unless you also help the couple address all the issues in their intimate relationship. Recognizing this shift from the focus of merely trying to fix the sex to understanding and nurturing the entire relationship is really important. My guest today is Rhonda Farr. She is an intimacy coach and a personal friend of mine. And today you're going to get some great things out of this interview. You're going to hear about the time when a person asked her for sex while on an airplane. You'll get to hear her thoughts on why high achievers struggle in intimacy and in their marriage. You'll also hear us role play what a conversation might look like in addressing sexual desire difference concerns between a husband and a wife. We have a tradition on this podcast where I read a recent review. Your reviews are very important. If you'll take a moment to pause this podcast right now and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and if you hear your review read on the air, send an email to support@getyourmarriageon.com and I'll personally mail you a gift to thank you. So here's a recent review. This person says, "This podcast has been tremendously helpful to me in better understanding my own responsibility and helping improve all aspects of intimacy in my marriage. They do not shy away from topics that many in the Christian culture or environment consider taboo, but I feel like they do it in a very reverent, respectful way that acknowledges the sanctity of marital intimacy. And they always try to point things back to strengthening your marriage and being more selfless and not selfish. I am so grateful for their candidness in addressing these topics, and I wish I had this resource available to me much earlier in my married life." Amen, and thank you. Yes, that's exactly what we're all about here. Okay, tomorrow is June 1st. We're kicking off our International Lovemaking Day Challenge. As you know, June 9th is International Lovemaking Day. It should be on your calendar and circle because 6/9, get it? June 9th is 6/9, and that's why it's International Lovemaking Day. Anyway, we're putting on the challenge leading up to this very important holiday. What you do is you complete simple intimacy challenges with your spouse and you earn points, and you can win prizes such as lingerie, toys, and tons of other goodies, all designed to make sex fun and strengthen your marriage in and out of the bedroom. All you need to do is download the Intimately Us app and get started. We also have 2 very different kinds of retreats coming up. On July 12 to 13 is our virtual retreat. This is perfect for couples that want to get away for a weekend, enjoy some instruction from a hotel or from their home, and learn techniques that'll enhance sexual intimacy in your marriage. Our second retreat, coming up in October 10th through 13th, this is our in-person retreat, and this is ideal for couples who are in otherwise happy marriages but wish things were better in the intimacy and sex department. This is where we meet over 4 days and 3 nights in a picturesque destination, and it's like a vacation. You get great instruction from me and other coaches that I bring. There's amazing food. We do really fun excursions, and this is great if you really want to dig deeper into your relationship and you want to have a great turnaround in a short order when it comes to sex and intimacy in a relationship. All right, now let's begin the interview with Rhonda Farr. Rhonda, I am so honored that you'd come back on the podcast. This is the 3rd time you've been on the Get Your Marriage On podcast. So this is really special to me that you'd come back, and I love our conversations.
Thank you, Dan. You just told me I'm number 1. So I'd like to tell the listeners, Rhonda Farr is number 1 on the Dan
That's right.
podcast.
Episode number 1 was with you. Exactly. Very good. So you have this gift, Rhonda, of men opening up and talking about their private lives with you. They feel very comfortable in that. Can you tell me of a time when that got you in a little bit of trouble?
Yes. There was a time when I was on an airplane with a total stranger. I had to be sandwiched between these 2 guys. Never my favorite to be in the middle. I always choose the aisle seat if I can, not the window. I like the aisle because you never know if you're going to have to get up and pee. And the people pleaser in me does not want to have to bother the person beside me. But anyway, before I even sat down, this guy that I was going to be sitting beside for the next 4 hours, he said, "Oh, thank goodness it's you." I didn't know this guy, so I thought, what are you talking about? I sat down and he starts complimenting what he thinks is a compliment anyway, my size, my appearance, and I start feeling my skin crawl a little bit. This guy starts opening up all this dialogue about the things that he enjoys physically, the things that he gets excited about. And he literally said, "Would you like to join the Mile High Club today?" And you would think he was joking. Like, if I heard somebody else say this, I would be like, "You're over exaggerating, you're joking." I told him not really. And he proceeded to give me the instructions anyway, how many minutes to wait, where he was going to go. The guy gets back, and I don't want to take too much time on this story, but it is fascinating to me. He said, "Watch this, I'm about to get free drinks from the flight attendants." And I was like, okay, whatever. So he had slipped them chocolate, he told me earlier, and so he comes back. Sure enough, he gets multiple free alcoholic beverages. The guy starts getting a little loose in his talk, and I finally felt comfortable enough to say, "Why are you acting like this? Like, what is it in your life that is causing you to show up this way?" And he did. He started spilling his guts about his childhood abuse, his childhood traumas. He talked about when he used to try to escape to his basement and go organize his whole set of toys. And as a teenager, organize his cars and motorcycles. And then as a physician, organize all the bigger and better toys of his life. And I literally just said to him, "You don't have to be this way. You can have a different life." He was a little bit too gone to be able to receive my advice. But Dan, when we got off that plane, he said, "Will you just hold my hand? Will you just touch me? Even if you won't go to the bathroom, will you hold my hand?" Like, no, get off of this plane. Get out of here. But yeah, there's something about me. I don't know. People just open up and tell me the crazy stuff.
What's crazy to me hearing that story is here's a man this is sexual harassment.
He's a physician, and he's very open about how educated he is and smart. Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
Yes, you're being sexually harassed, yet you totally put on your life coaching brain and do these kung fu moves to totally stay calm and cool and collected through it. And he ends up getting a coaching session from you out of the whole thing.
So funny. I didn't really feel threatened by him, probably because we were in a plane, a public place, and there were people nearby. But that is something that my brain, through my job, has learned to do. I don't look at the behaviors on the surface level the way I used to. When I hear things like that, my brain automatically goes to, I wonder what caused this. What's going on beneath the surface? What's in your background? What's your patterns, right? Which I think is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited for that. That's my favorite.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. What I want to talk about today is this pattern I see in some of my coaching. So the vignette I want to use to paint the picture of our discussion is this. There's a husband and wife. He is the higher desire spouse for sex in their marriage. She's the lower desire spouse. He's very successful in his work. He's really good at running companies, multiple companies. He's got teams of managers under him, assistants and everything. He's really talented with entrepreneurship and leadership. And one of the qualities that makes him great is he's really a go-getter. And he knows how to not take no for an answer. He knows how to push through challenges. And part of what drives him is just the mere fact that there is a challenge. Just because it's a challenge, he wants to overcome and conquer those things. In his intimate life with his wife, they're really struggling. He wants sex a lot. She doesn't. However, when they do have sex, she says it's a great experience for her. It's pleasurable. She has orgasms and multiple orgasms. So, like, from a high-level view, she's having a good time. Yet, his biggest frustration is, of the two of them, he's always thinking about sex. She says, I never think about sex. He wants to be pursued by her, and for her, sex is always an afterthought. And it's come to a breaking point in their relationship where he wants to be wanted so badly, and she's really struggling to kind of get there in their marriage relationship. Any thoughts you have on that general scenario?
I have a lot of thoughts. I jotted down a few things. But number one, somebody like this shows up on a consult call with me, and they feel like they're the only ones. They're like, no, Ronnie, you don't understand. I don't even have to work for money anymore. You don't understand. I manage all these things. Like, I'm good at rejection. I'm not like you would think, right? Like, they really want me to know, like, no, this is different. I see this dynamic. I don't want to say the individual circumstances aren't different. They are. But I see this dynamic repeatedly in my work. And here are a few reasons why I think this type of couple marries each other, okay? I call my clients high achievers. So it's a double-edged sword, really. And you alluded to a little bit. So let's just call it out a little bit more overtly. Your greatest strength can sometimes be your greatest weakness if you overuse it. So these high achievers, they're so good at seeing a goal, figuring it out, working hard. Sometimes they will, and I'm going to use the word manipulate, and I don't mean that in a negative tone. It's just like they know how to manipulate the factors, right? That could be a really good thing to make it work in their favor to produce the outcome that they think they want. That's beautiful. It's a skill set that I sometimes wish I had more of. There's nothing wrong with that. When we get into trouble with that is when we try to pretend relationships work the same as businesses, companies, and finances.
Right. Especially intimate relationships.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. You can't do it. But the brain in these high achievers has been conditioned for so long and got the reward and payoff for so long of seeing a goal, doubling down, working hard, and getting it, that they superimpose that skill set onto their intimate relationships where it doesn't work. And then they keep trying and they keep trying. It creates some unhealthy patterns, and they're exhausted. Their partner is exhausted, and it doesn't work. And so then it's almost like they're both just over there like, what else do we do? Ready to give up. Much like it sounds like what you're saying.
You're right. So in this vignette with this couple, this, chasm in their sexual desire leads to some of the biggest fights that they've ever had in their marriage. And they can get along and manage well when it comes to finances and parenting and vacationing and all the other major aspects of the relationship. I believe we always co-create the marriage dynamic we're in. We always participate in it. So there could be real reasons that he is participating in creating a low desire wife in this type of a scenario. What are some angles that we can look at how they are both contributing to this kind of a dynamic in the relationship?
I love that you said different angles, because I think some of these are going to apply to some of your listeners and some of them won't. So anything we say today, see if it fits for you. If it doesn't resonate, then maybe ask your partner if they feel it, right? Or toss it. So I want to start with that. Number one, this high desire partner, when he feels like he's got everything he wants except this deep physical intimacy or except being desired by his partner, it almost becomes like this neediness on his end, like he wants so bad to solve it and he gets in that scarcity mode. And here's something I want everybody to start thinking about. When you're needy with something, your partner's desire, if they have it, or whatever they bring to accommodate that neediness, will always feel like obligation. Like, just by definition,
Right.
think about this. Need is fulfilled with obligation. And then that sets
Yes.
both up for some trouble.
Right, right. In what ways is he coming across as needy? In what ways is she, meeting that neediness with obligation?
Okay, so for each couple, this is going to look a little bit different. So we're going to talk very generally here. Many of my clients, though, they have learned to use sex to regulate their emotions. So a lot of men will say, it's not that we're not having any sex. And even in this scenario, it's like, no, when we do have sex, it's really great. And I'll often say to them, then sex isn't the solution. And they're like, no, 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 but it is. You don't understand. But if we're using sex to regulate our emotions, we're not necessarily using it to show and receive love. And that's what I think most of us are really craving, to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved in this most vulnerable way. But when we're using it as an emotional regulation tool, it sort of sabotages that greater desire and need that most of us have.
I love that because I was reading about a recent study done on outcomes of traditional American sex therapy. So these are couples that go to a sex therapist to help work through sexual issues. And 2 years later, they survey these people if there's any improvement in their sex lives. And it's shocking that there's no improvement, generally speaking, in people's sex lives 2 years later after they've been to sex therapy. There may have been an increase in frequency, especially right after therapy, but then after 2 years, they go back to their normal patterns. And you dig a little deeper, because when you sit in a sex therapist's office, like this couple, if they went to a traditional sex therapist, they're going to address sexual issues only, right? Like ability to orgasm and dysfunction and what makes you more interested? Well, here, have some pornographic films, or you should masturbate more. Like those kind of advice is very typical for traditional sex therapy. But their issue isn't about sexual concerns. It's actually an intimacy issue. So you're addressing the wrong kind of a problem in these kinds of issues. So it was enlightening to me to see, if you want real outcomes, you got to look at intimacy, the underlying dynamic and the meanings at play in the interaction. So this husband is seeking that emotional comfort, that validation through sex, and demands it, wants it. And
Yeah.
it's just so hard to give that when that's an obligation.
That's a fascinating study. And I'll tell you something that I tell almost every man who comes on a consult call with me. I tell him, I'm almost positive that what you're looking for is not about sex. And it's okay if you don't fully believe that, but if you're not at least open to the idea that this isn't about sex, I'm not a good fit to work with you. Like, I literally don't even want to work with somebody who's not willing to explore that idea. Now, I say almost positive because there are physiological issues. There are some trauma issues, which even still is an emotional issue, but like sexual trauma and things like that. There are some issues that are different than what I teach. But most of the time, it's what you said. It's an emotional connection regulation issue. And I want to speak to what you asked me to. We kind of overlooked this, but what happens on the wife or the partner side of this when it gets needy?
Yeah.
When they're in this obligation mode, like, okay, he's needy. I know if I say no, then he's going to be grumpy. There will be emotional consequences. Like, he will make sure we all know he's unhappy. Then she starts to feel like, I can't trust myself. Like, do I really desire him? Or do I just want him to not be angry and frustrated with me or grumpy with the kids, right? And I have many wives, after their husbands work with me for about a year or so or less, it doesn't take that long. I just have a lot of clients who like the emotional accountability they get with me. But anyway, their wives will come in and get on a call and say, oh my gosh, he's changed so much. But Rhonda, I still don't trust my body. Even though I know he's changed, my body still has a physical, visceral response to that neediness and obligation. And so then the wives often have to work through their own emotional patterns and all that was created for them when they felt like they were in this obligation mode and they were scared to not help him regulate his emotions with sex. So it gets really tricky on both sides. And that's why the pattern gets perpetuated. And I want to speak to what you said. You said your client was like, no, when we have sex, it's great. It's pleasurable. And I'll just say, physically pleasurable is not the same as emotionally fulfilling. And so I would even, if I were working with this couple, I would even pull that apart because we think physical pleasure is, quote, success. And in some ways it is. It makes sex a lot better, obviously. But that's still not working on the emotional pattern of obligation, neediness, trusting oneself in desire.
That's good. So a lot of the times these patterns have been going on so long, it's like driving to work. I don't think about my commute. Like I get in the car and I can think about other things. And next thing I know, I'm at my office, right? It's becomes so automatic. How do you then disassociate sex from validation? How do you separate that when it's been so integral to the way you've been operating?
That's a good question. And I'm going to dance around it just a little if I can take some permissions here. I don't know if we have to fully disassociate it. I don't think validation is necessarily a bad thing. And I think you think this way too. I believe I've heard you in discussion groups. Validation isn't necessarily bad. I think of it more of this way. When we have to have that validation to regulate our mood and emotions all the time, that's the way I might say it. And the way that we stop doing that is we learn how to tolerate our emotions in our body. You've worked with me a little bit on some things like this, and it's so hard. But for me, when I start to tap in and connect to the parts of me that need the validation, that's more helpful than saying, I don't need the validation. Does that make sense? Ask me more questions about that.
100% agreed, Rhonda. That's great. That's great. And I think some people do take the message, wait, then validation is bad. Then they'll the pendulum swings the opposite way. They distance themselves from anything that might be self-validating. But that's not what we're talking about here. It's when you rely on something external to you to regulate your own emotions, you then become dependent on it. And we want to become more emotionally mature is to be more emotionally self-reliant, kind of be able to stand on your own 2 feet emotionally in it, regardless of what someone else is doing or not doing, because you don't have control over other people.
Yes. And the issue with these achievers sometimes, again, take or leave whatever I'm saying that resonates and doesn't for your listeners. But with these achievers, sometimes they have learned that they can work really hard and get the validation. And so before they even met their wife, that pattern was being perpetuated, right? And it's almost like they've learned that they don't have to feel those internal emotions because they can do so much externally in their world. And so that's alive and burning inside of them in other areas of their lives. And like I said before, then they'll superimpose that pattern or that skill set even over here in the marriage. And so I think that's why they come by it honestly, is because they have learned that validation feels really good and they're really good at getting it. And it's almost like they're surprised when it doesn't work the same way. Sometimes I use the word entitled. I'll be like, you're not entitled to getting that feel good everywhere in your life. And they're like, no, I'm not entitled. I work really hard for what I've got. And I say, I know you worked your butt off harder than most people I know, but it's like their brain has created this connection. Hard work, I freaking am going to get what I want. And that's what we're talking about.
Right.
It doesn't work in sex.
It doesn't work in relationships. No.
Yeah.
Although you do work hard in your relationship because you care about the other person. I mean, any good relationship requires sacrifice on both ends. But how much sex you got out of it, it shouldn't be the sole measuring stick for your efforts and contribution to the marriage. Because
that's a good point.
You're working with 2 people here with very different backgrounds, different ideas, very different people.
And I'll clarify, when I mean working externally to get the result, the way I look at it is very different than working internally. Now, if you're working really hard on yourself internally, I have seen a very high yield of intimacy. Self-intimacy first, to lay the foundation of relational intimacy, to lay the foundation of physical intimacy. I have seen it work that way.
Great. Speaking of internal work, I've heard you use this term before, the triad of mastery in the brain. Can you speak on that for a little bit?
Yeah, I want to tread lightly here because I'm not a neuroscientist. That's above my pay grade, and I know probably just enough to be dangerous. So there's the disclaimer. So I'll maybe speak in terms that are a little bit more familiar to me. But we all have this part of our brain, and it kind of some people might even talk about this part of the brain that gets activated by our inner child. And I'm going to call it like the safety brain. Our amygdala, we all have it. It stores these highly emotional moments in our lives, and especially if those highly emotional situations were repeated over time, that's going to be like stuck in the amygdala, and we want it to be. That's so we don't walk out in front of cars. That's so we don't like pet bears at the zoo or whatever. Our amygdala is like scanning for danger all the time. It's like, don't get near that. So if we even smell rejection in our partner, like we get a little bit nervous to initiate, it's like, oh, that hurts, don't go near it. And so our inner child is really protected by this part of the safety brain, because the inner child, when we were developing our brain, is like, we can't feed ourselves, we can't clothe ourselves, we need somebody else for shelter, all those things. And so it really learns how to scan for safety and please the people around us. So
it's a survival mechanism.
100%. So
right.
Yeah, we have the safety brain, and then we have what I might call our inner teenager instead of our inner child.
Okay.
But it's more like the excitement dopamine brain, right? And it learns like, wait, I'm kind of growing into my body, and I'm probably smarter than these caregivers, right? That's what our teenage brain thinks anyway. And it's like seeking these new things and these excitement things. And sometimes that teenager will like just come out and protect the inner child. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say there's this inner child that doesn't feel super safe at home for whatever reason. They grow into their body, they grow into their intelligence a little bit more, but maybe not quite their prefrontal cortex and their wisdom, right? And they'll be like, screw everybody here, I'm going to fight back, right? And they might like work really hard and get a paper route to provide the Nike tennis shoes that they want. Or they might like bulk up to be able to protect against the bully or whatever. But it's like they're coming in with this like dopamine hit of, I'm going to do what I want, and it's going to feel really good. And it also protects that inner child, right?
Right.
It's also very adaptive. But these two, the inner child, the safety brain, and the inner teenager, or this dopamine excitement brain, they still are not what we want running the adult show, the adult relationships.
Right.
Okay. So we think about what's this mastery brain or this integrated connection brain. That's when this prefrontal cortex can come online. And we can say, I see you, inner child. I see you, safety brain. Like, sex feels really threatening because what? Like, we are asking somebody to take care of us in a way that we can't take care of ourselves. And that feels really scary. And then I see you, teenage brain or dopamine brain. Like, please give us the payoff so we can just settle down and feel okay a little bit, right? And we'll like work really hard and say, desire me, want me, right? And that teenage brain is like seeking that excitement and that validation. If we can connect with this prefrontal cortex and this higher level thinking, like, I see why this is happening, and I see why I tend to have these urges and to do it this way. How do I want to bring in my adult resources and handle this? Can I be knowable? Can I be really intimate and knowable and show my inner child, show my inner teenager? Can I be very intimate with my partner without just seeking like that sexual validation? And that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard, especially when it's not false to want sex. Like, what I mean is there's truth behind good sex, good sexual connection. It's great for a marriage, right? Like, on face value, sex does so much good for the relationship. It does good for, physical health. Like, people can make long lists of all the benefits of a good sex life. Yet, and when we don't have it like we think we do, it's easy to, like, either it's that child brain or that teenage brain easily showing, that part of yourself kind of wanting to run the show.
Yeah. And they're not bad. Like we both said, these parts of our brain, they just are. I have them, you have them, we all have them. But when we can like integrate and bring all of that online with a lot of compassion and understanding, that's where we get a lot more solid in who we are. And we can make a bid for connection and know that we're going to be okay, that we can take care of that teenage self or that inner child, that we can self-soothe, that we can regulate our own emotions. Is it still going to suck? Yeah. No matter how evolved we get, rejection's going to suck. And that's normal. But can we approach this higher level intimacy with higher level maturity, with mind body integration?
Yeah. This is really salient for me because this happened to me recently in a profound way with a friends group involving one of our kids. We just created a situation where there was, with some friends, all of a sudden some really bad feelings between us. And it was not our choosing. We didn't want this to happen. And I could feel all of those different parts of me come up. I felt like the people pleaser in me, like, no, 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 this isn't what it's like. You have it wrong. And then there's the protector in me that's like, screw them. Like, I don't get pushed around. Of course, like, they don't know any better. Well, we know what's up. And then I could just feel all these different parts coming online as we navigate this really difficult emotional challenge that we're going through. And then there's also different layers too, because it not only involves me, involves our child, but it also involves the relationship between my wife, because my wife takes it a different way. And I freak out because, wait, are we on the same page anymore? Like, what happened? And then what does this mean for our relationship? So yes, it just comes up in so many different ways. And I remember taking care of some things. It was in the afternoon. It was hot, sweaty. I went and just had a shower to clean up. And something about that shower was so soothing at bringing on that prefrontal cortex brain in that moment. And I could just like calm all of those different parts down and just really think through, no, this is kind of what's happening. This is who I want to be. This is who I choose to be in this. And I walked out of that shower just feeling so much more peace and calm about the situation. And regardless of how other people are going to choose to be or not to be, I had my parts more organized. I guess I had more self-leadership in that. And so I recommend showers.
I love that story. If it's okay, I'll share a story that relates to. I have a really close friend. She happens to be the higher desire partner in her marriage. And she was talking about her and her husband had made this plan. There was this specific thing that, they were going to try. And for whatever reason, at this point, she just felt like she could not do it. And she really wanted to enjoy it and be in the moment with it. And so she said, we're out to dinner, looking at each other across the table. And like, I wanted to bring it up, but wasn't sure how it would go because she's the higher desire partner. And so she just said, like, hey, I know we planned this thing tonight. I really want to do it. Would it be okay if we put it on the calendar for like 3 days away? And he just said to her, like, well, I'm not sure. I'll have to play that by ear because I have X, Y, and Z that day. And she said everything inside of her felt so rejected. She's the one saying, let's push this out. She's
Yes.
the one saying, I don't feel like, but when he said, I'll play it by ear, was like she felt it all come up. And apparently, and they've been doing some work together now, and he noticed that and he was like, I feel like something I just said has way more to do with the context in your head than the words I said. And she said, I was able to take a deep breath, really tap into myself of what's going on here for me. And she said, I finally was able to get to the place where I could tell him there are parts of me that feel really afraid that this isn't as important to you as it is to me, and it won't be prioritized. If I don't do it now, it won't happen. It's like, I don't trust that this is going to come back around. I don't trust you to value it the way I do. It was really cool because she was like, I was finally able to tap into all these parts of me without letting them spew out of my mouth in anger or rejection or like emotional consequence and punishment. And, if we saw this on a rom-com, if we saw this interaction, we'd just be like,
Uh-huh.
whatever. It would be so forgettable. It would be like the least interesting thing of the whole movie. But the work you
Uh-huh.
and I do, it's like, oh my gosh, these micro moments that you can do that, what you said, like really notice what they've got going on, what I've got going on. It's so powerful. And I think these micro moments change marriages. They change relationships. And I don't think we can overstate how important noticing your emotions and your parts are and learning how to articulate and be known instead of react from the emotion.
I love that story because they were able to be honest in it instead of just when he noticed that what he said may have bothered her, I could just imagine it'd be so easy just to sweep it under the rug and move on with the evening. But yet he
Or
paused and
be
said,
like, dude,
let's
you're
talk
the
about
one
this.
who killed. Yeah. I mean, I could see being defensive as being very justifiable, right? People would be like, of course you had every
Yes.
right to be defensive about that. Like that was her,
Right.
not you. But when you're emotionally in tune and bringing those parts of the brain and those parts of safety and the dopamine and excitement, I mean, we could point each of those parts out in that story if that feels important. But like when you can see those parts and bring them online and use your resources and then articulate that, that is insanely powerful.
That's good. Great, great. So let's come back full circle with the vignette of this hypothetical couple with the high achieving husband and the wife with sexual differences. Do you want to role play this as an example of how a possible conversation can go that, we're bringing online that adult brain in that conversation?
I'll give it my best shot.
All right, me too. We'll see where this goes. We haven't scripted this or anything, so we're both just off the cuff here.
Wing it.
All right. So you'll be Rhonda, I'll be Dan.
I'll be the
So
wife, is that right?
yeah, you're the
And,
wife, I'm the husband.
okay,
So
perfect.
we're going to do the more mature version for sake of time.
Yeah.
But it'd be like, I really hate it when it feels like I'm the only one interested in building a sexual relationship with you.
When I think about our sexual relationship, it just makes me feel uncomfortable. And I think that I've kind of felt swallowed up in your idea of the sexual relationship. And I just don't even know how to approach it, honestly.
Let me ask you a question that's really hard for me to ask, but I want an honest answer. Can you help me better understand what is it like being married to me, especially around sex?
I think for a long time, I felt like sex is the only thing you care about. It feels like the other things I bring to the marriage are unimportant, and that's been really hard for me. I don't like the idea that I'm just here to give you what you want. It feels like you don't want to see or accept all the parts of me. And at times that's made me feel really small. I'm trying to step out of that, but I almost find myself not trusting your motives when you talk about sex or other things of intimacy.
It hurts for me to hear that, but I mean, we're multimillionaires, so I feel like I can afford, we can hire a private chef for our family, I can hire daycare, we can hire laundry service. Like there's everything that, a stereotypical housewife would do. We can afford all of that. But the only thing I can't get is sex. It's like the one thing in life that I can't get. And it's easy for me to dismiss all your other contributions because I feel like I can out contribute those things because of our earning power.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I feel like I don't validate even your earning and the beautiful lives that you've provided for us. It's not that I don't appreciate that, but I think I feel similarly emotionally. Just like you, we can pay for everything else, but I can't pay for you to love me. I can't pay for you to care about what's going on inside of me. And so, in some ways, I can understand what you're saying because I feel it too. I crave it. I would give all of our money away if I could feel I mattered to you, not just sex.
So I tell myself that, well, of course I care about you because I provide for you and I provide for our kids, and you have a great life. You can go to the gym every day. You can do all your hobbies that you want to do. You can go on trips whenever you want to go see extended family. I know we live far away from family, but because of our earning power, it's not been an issue. But now I'm starting to see, if I understand you right, I guess what you're saying is among all those things, you're saying you don't feel I'm invested in you as a person. I'm only interested in what I can get out of you.
Maybe I do think you love me, but I also often feel really lonely in this beautiful life that we've created and you've provided in some ways. I think maybe the way I would say it is I feel like it's not that you're not invested in me, but it's hard for you to see me beyond sex. It's hard for you to see beyond that desire that you physically.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. Can you give me an example of how I can see you better beyond sex?
It's a good question because I'm starting at times to not even trust myself that I know what that might look like. I can give it a stab. I think maybe at the end of the day, it would feel good if I just felt like you wanted to know me, that you wanted to know what I've been thinking about. You want to know what my interests are, maybe my imperfections, if I was able to be open and let those be seen without fear of judgment. I'm working on figuring that out.
And I think my desire for you to pursue me sexually has been so dominant in my brain, it overshadows my ability to just calm down enough to have a conversation with you like that. Because I can just see myself now as like, looking at my watch, like, are we done? Can we move on to sex yet? Like, in that, it's too much. It's getting in the way of me really knowing you.
Thank you for being honest. This is what I'm asking for that. What does it feel like for you when you're craving me to pursue or desire you? Can you tell me not just like that you want sex, but what's your experience? What are your fears? What's vulnerable in that for you?
I experience you as someone that likes to play small, someone that wants to stay in the shadows, someone that's happy to get along, to go along to get along, but not someone that's really like standing up for herself. And like I've seen glimpses of you, behaving those ways in certain contexts, like especially in parenting and your volunteer work and in the church and things like that. But you are so happy to be second place to me and not my equal. And I think that drives me crazy.
I think you're right that I go along to get along and I haven't stood up for myself. And the more I learn about this, I think I've done that because I'm afraid of the emotional consequences that I'll have to pay. It's really
Right.
easy for me to understand when you're not happy with something or when you wish that I would do it differently. We all know that, and it creates a tone in the house. And especially for me, it feels really unsafe to think about standing up for myself when it's not what you want from me. That's hard.
Oh, so I'm creating a marriage. I'm co creating this relationship I'm seeing now where it's partially my fault. Why you have the aspects of things I dislike. It's because if I really truly let go and let you be your own person, I'm afraid it won't mean what I want. And I'd be threatened by that. And then we're going to have another fight again. And I can see why it's a lot easier for you to stay small, tell me what I want to hear in the moment, and when we never really address our problems. I need to work on that.
Super scary for me to think about you being unhappy with my response. And in some ways, that's why I participated in going along to get along for so long. I realize that I've participated in that way and it hasn't led to a healthy dynamic for either of us. But it's really scary to think about not doing that anymore. And it's also scary to think about learning to trust myself because it's almost like my brain thinks through the lens of what makes you happy, not what makes me happy. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
having a hard time figuring that out. Even when you ask me that question, like, what do I wish you would see? I'm just not used to thinking in that way. And that's hard and scary and uncomfortable, but there's a distant glimpse that it could be freeing as well.
All right, time out. That was great, Rhonda. What do you think?
I saw you doing this. I'm like, oh man,
I
Dan's like,
know
I
it's
love it.
real.
Yeah, it's so good.
I know it's a role play, but I still feel all the feels as we're going through that. Maybe
Yeah,
because maybe an aspect of me has been in this situation before and I know what it feels like.
absolutely. So many of us have, right? It's pretty common, or we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yet we don't talk enough about it in constructive ways. So
Yeah, for sure.
thanks for role playing. And if you're listening to this podcast, I hope it's been really helpful for you to at least pick up on something to give you a tool or an idea of where to go. And if you need more guidance, there's excellent people out there like Rhonda Farr and myself and my team that can help you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dan. This was a lot of fun. And
Yes.
I feel important to just say at the end of that role play, you mentioned it, we were playing the more mature versions of ourselves. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize when you come and you start to embody that more mature, that more solid sense of self that can connect some of these parts, it might really catch your partner off guard. They may not,
Hmm.
they probably will not be able to show up in this way at first. And that's actually really, really normal because you've been thinking about this for a long time. You've probably put in a lot more thought and effort and work, and it can be really disorienting at first for your partner to hear these things and to see you differently as much as they have wanted you to be a little bit different, right? And would welcome it. It's also very disorienting. So I'll throw that out there too.
Great. Very good. Well, thank you. Tell everyone where they can find you.
You can find me at rondafar.com. You can find me on Instagram at rondafar_coaching. And I have a podcast, the Intimacy Podcast for the $1 Million Man. You can also find me there.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, or even comment below, and go see what other wonderful videos we have that will help you strengthen your marriage intimately.